President Joe Biden joins the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. Nearly 24 leaders are attending the gathering. It's the first time the U.S. has hosted the summit since its launch in 1994. However, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua have been excluded due to their human rights records. This triggered a boycott by several nations, including Mexico. Issues like economic development, climate change, and immigration get the spotlight at the summit. Biden said unlawful migration is not acceptable.
Safe and orderly migration is good for all of our economies, including the United States. It can be a catalyst for sustainable growth. But all unlawful migration is not acceptable. We will enforce our borders, including through innovative, coordinated action with our regional partners.
Biden also said a new plan related to immigration will be announced later this week. Pro-life organizations and churches are saying that violence and vandalism is escalating, and they want authorities to take action. Last week, a pro-life crisis pregnancy center on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. was vandalized by a suspected pro-abortion group called Jane's Revenge. The alleged group claimed responsibility for firebombing the headquarters of a pro-life center in Wisconsin last month. Pro-life organizations say that similar incidents of vandalism and arson have increased across the country in the wake of the leaked Supreme Court draft opinion overturning Roe v. Wade. Is it religious liberty or discrimination? Lawmakers weigh in on a Supreme Court, while Senator Ted Cruz gives us his take on threats against Justice Brett Kavanaugh. NTD's Iris Tao brings us more.
Is it legal to deny services that contradict your religious beliefs? Some Republican lawmakers say yes and are urging the Supreme Court to support the Colorado woman's right to do so.
They can speak their mind even if it disagrees with government policy.
Over 50 Republicans in Congress have filed an amicus brief supporting Lori Smith, a web designer who refuses to build wedding websites for same-sex couples, citing her religious beliefs. But a U.S. District Court has denied her request for a special exemption from Colorado's anti-discrimination law. And now her appeal is sitting in the High Court.
I'm simply asking for the freedom for all of us to speak consistently with our beliefs.
A pro-LGBTQ law firm has filed a brief opposing Smith's case, arguing the case is using free speech and religious freedom as weapons of discrimination. But Smith's lawyer told me that Smith is not concerned with working with the people, but promoting the message.
She's worked with LGBT, those who identify as LGBT, and those from just all different walks of life. What matters is that she's passionate about the project and that she believes in it, because she can't speak a message that violates her core convictions, and no American should have to do that.
And Senator Ted Cruz argued that it's not just about religious beliefs, but about everyone's right to speak or stay silent.
Should left-wing newspaper columnists be forced to write conservative columns?
Yes.
No, 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 and as fun as it might be, no.
Cruz added that Smith has been facing insults and even death threats for defending her position. And I asked him what he thinks of the recent threats against Justice Kavanaugh over abortion ruling.
Look, what happened this week with Justice Kavanaugh is horrifying. And that's a threat not just to Justice Kavanaugh's life, to the lives of his family, but it's also a threat to the rule of law.
Meanwhile, the Supreme Court is expected to hear oral arguments in Lori Smith's case in the fall, and one Congresswoman said at the press conference that she's praying for free speech to win. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Could heated political rhetoric be fueling the abortion debate that has led one man to allegedly travel across the country with duct tape, zip ties, a handgun, along with other accessories in an attempt to kidnap and kill Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh? We sat down with Oklahoma Congressman Markwayne Mullin. Congressman Markwayne Mullin, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report again.
Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
Congressman, I have to ask you about Justice Kavanaugh and what appears to be a premeditated attempted attack on his life. How does something like this happen?
Well, for the last 2 years, we've heard the Democrats talk about domestic terrorism, right? And they only point to one group of people when this happens. They only point to the far right and say that's domestic terrorism. I mean, I sit on the House Intelligence Committee, and we get briefed all the time by intelligence agencies talking about how they're trying to root out domestic terrorism. And they point to one group, and it's always the far right. Well, if that same standard of domestic terrorism is going to apply, then why isn't this being called out as domestic terrorism? You have Justice Kavanaugh, who is trying to be intimidated because of his stance on Roe v. Wade. You have someone that literally got an assassination kit together, drove from California all the way to Kavanaugh's house, was there. The marshals asked him, hey, he turned around and walked away and called 911, and where's everybody at? No one's calling this out. If this same stuff were to happen to our newest justice, Justice Jackson, you would have the Democrats bouncing up and down, calling it domestic terrorism, and we've got to stop this, and we've got to root this out. But the difference between the two is that this gentleman represented their narrative. I mean, it was Chuck Schumer, Leader Schumer, who in 2020 stood up and said that Kavanaugh was going to pay for Roe v. Wade. You call people out like this, be consistent. But but the Democrats are so silent on the issue because it fits their narrative that it's not just laughable, it's dangerous. And the left media that's also silent on this, not calling it domestic terrorism, not calling it like they would if this was a group that they thought was a Republican group or the far right group, they would be calling it out. But they're silent on it. And the American people should see the hypocrisy and see right through this, because it is absolutely dangerous that these people are leading the country. Literally.
Congressman, I want to read you Title 18, Section 1507 of the U.S. Code. It says it's illegal to picket or parade in front of a courthouse or judge's home with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or with the intent of influencing any judge. Yet, there's still protesters outside of Justice Kavanaugh's house last night after the attempted murder plot was, foiled. What gives?
Not one person's been arrested except this one individual. The individual that called 911, by the way, on themselves. Not one single person has been arrested protesting any of these justices' houses. Not one of them. And yet it is against the law. DOJ, we have wrote a letter, the House Republicans have wrote a letter to DOJ asking them to investigate this, asking them to look and asking them to start prosecuting it and uphold the letter of the law. We're either a nation of laws that are enforced or we are not. But once again, we have a one-party rule system here in Washington, D.C., and it's ran by Democrats. The same Democrats that aren't enforcing the laws on our southern border, the same Democrats that aren't enforcing the laws in their own cities when it comes to Portland and Seattle, and during the protests when we saw a federal building be attacked, we saw a federal employee be killed. No one's enforcing the law until all of a sudden it fit their narrative. And you had protesters on the state capitol, and unfortunately things that happened on January 6th that now they're prosecuting, and still yet, because they're going to have the hearing tonight on the January 6th commission on primetime. That's the lead story, something that happened a long time ago that fits their narrative, but they're not talking about what's happening today. And today, what's happening going on right now in front of our justice's house, that's 100% against the law. And they're ignoring it.
And it's not just the justices we're seeing here with these attempted acts of violence. Since this abortion debate has heated up, we're seeing a string of attacks on pro-life centers and churches. One was just firebombed. Does the Justice Department need to take notice?
Of course the Justice Department needs to take notice. As I said, if this isn't domestic terrorism under their definition, then what is?
Congressman Mark Wayne Mullin, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
3 U.S.-based companies have been accused of exporting blueprints of U.S. satellites and rocket system prototypes to China. The Commerce Department has suspended the company's export privileges. The 3 companies include Quicksilver Manufacturing, Rapid Cut, and U.S. Prototype. These blueprints are used for 3D printing and were sent without authorization. In a statement yesterday, a spokesperson for the U.S. Commerce Department said these companies may have saved money by outsourcing 3D printing to China, but they did so at the expense of compromising U.S. national security.